Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Axis of Genius podcast. My name is Blake Chalfant, and I'm joined by my co host, DH. And it's so good to be back here with all of you. And as the tradition goes, I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Mr. DH, for our hip hop invocation.
Yeah. So, just kind of in the spirit of repetition is the mother of mastery. I've been on this practice of trying to pen one of these verses a day, and it kind of goes in different directions depending what's on top of my mind stream. But I had a lot of fun kind of penning this one, anticipating being in the anticipatory joy of this podcast coming up today. So this one goes: represent the best of the mind stream, cleaning up falsities and limited identities. Joking, as we navigate the danger, let us in, we are the mystical stranger. Virtues to a T, the kind you want to steep, deep. Root down, let's rise. It's Renaissance codes that we gotta devise. So let's synthesize the best of what we've realized. This art of articulation, it's time to crystallize.
Man, I like that one a lot. On the spirit of hip hop, since it's been something that both of us have been, I guess, speaking about more and getting into, which has been, for me at least, a very out of left field kind of new exploration.
Mm.
Um, Before we get into the juice of today's episode, I'm curious just to hear a bit from you, and maybe I'll respond to this as well. Like, why are you getting into this? Why is it stoking your fire to be writing freestyle hip hop verses?
There's a few different threads to pull on here, but like one of the images that comes kind of from back in high school, when I grew up, I'd see my parents read the newspaper every morning. And I really, as a teenager, I was really deeply frustrated by this because it was just the sense of, wow, we are being inundated in bad news. Like, why would you want to start your day with whatever the tragedy of the morning is? And there's this beautiful quote. I forget who said this. I'm sure we could find it, but it's something to the effect of, um, fuck, I'm gonna mess it up. It's something to the effect of the poem. Man, I'm totally forgetting how it goes. It was fresh in my mind there for a moment. It was like the yeah, wow, it's totally gone. Anyway, there was this sense of, the newspaper is its own form of news and poetry is its own form of news. Something to the effect
Mm,
of what we're taking in each day. The poetry is its own headline, so to speak. And I
mm,
think that for me in the beginning of say the high school era of starting to get into hip hop, it was like that had a sense of um, that's the current event, so to speak. That's
mm.
what's inspiring and enlivening.
Totally, man. I feel that. And I haven't thought about it that way, but it's both things are, fresh off the press of human consciousness, and maybe the news is a bit less, but it's like current events just in different forms. And so it's like the expression of the zeitgeist in a way, like what is alive in the field of humanity that's coming through songs and poetry. And like that's just a fresh breath of life on earth in this time. And like time capsules in times of the past too. You read these 100 old poems, Rumi, things like this, just like time capsules of the breath of life.
Yeah,
The new,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. There's this old Tibetan practice that I recently learned about. They call it a lung, where when someone was being initiated into a practice, one of the lamas would just read over a text as fast as they could. And the idea was they were just breathing vital life into the transmission. It wasn't even about like intellectual or cognitive understanding of what's in the text. It's just this lung of us. We're just gonna take in the breath and recite it. And I feel like there's an interconnection there with hip hop. What's the news of the day? What's fresh? What's alive? What's off the press?
Yeah. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down there that I can feel, but I'm gonna practice restraint and not go down it right now because I want to shift gears a little bit. Um, so I was actually reading some of your Substack before our episode today, and was just getting inspired by some different directions that we can go in. And I think just to kind of frame the map and a little bit of where I would love to explore today is I think the essence of what we connect on so much together and share a love for, and there's so many ways to say this. You could call it the path of becoming, or chasing the horizon of our potential, or um, unlocking unobstructed genius, or dharma. There's so many ways to put it, but I feel like the essence of it is kind of expressing the kind of essential nature of each of us, and letting that river start to flow again, and the way that sort of interfaces with this collective happiness, like we spoke to last time. So kind of with that said, as the frame a bit, I want to read a quote of yours, and then we can go from there and start to unpack it. So you said, it's about going from visionary self-discovery, healing, putting your insights and lifestyle changes into action, and then experiencing life in a completely new developmental stage. A complete realization of your unique dharma flourishing in this world with immeasurable benefit.
Yeah.
And so, pulling from another piece, I just want to drop the word, I think you say entelechy. Is that how you
Yeah.
say it? Or is it
Entelechy. Totally. Yeah.
entelechy? So I love this kind of threefold map that I just read from you. And I feel like maybe the overarching umbrella would be entelechy in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to start there, and maybe you can first define entelechy and just maybe explain that a bit. And then we can kind of navigate through that sort of threefold map if you'd be game.
Yeah, for sure. So entelechy is the pursuit or the realization of the highest potential. And so it's this innate feeling that, say, within any project or any endeavor, that there is this sort of step-by-step progression out of which fruition comes. I think fruition is a nice word there, because we know when we've planted an apple tree that ultimately we want apples from it, but it goes through all these different developmental stages where you get to this moment where the apple is there. And then even the fruition of an apple, we know that there's different qualities of how an apple can taste, and there's phenomenal apples and there's so-so apples. And so there's all these important conditions that are going on and getting us to the apple experience. And this is true of our artistic craft as well. So the entelechy is really like an ultimate ideal. It's an ultimate ideal of what is the most amazing fruitional experience that we can have within our artistic endeavor. And it has a poetic or mythopoetic resonance that I think is quite elegant, just within this general idea of the realization of potential. So that's the entelechy. And then to kind of go back into this framing around, like, say, one's unique genius, self-discovery, going into training one's insights, and then going towards a fruition, kind of pursuing that entelechy. I think it could be helpful to kind of take a step back out of sort of where we find ourselves now and kind of into the past developmental arenas out of which got us here. And one of those main developmental arenas is the educational system. And I think it's fair to say that the general Western educational model is kind of putting square pegs through round holes, or round pegs through square holes. And what I mean by that is it's 30 kids in a room or 15 kids in a room, and generally speaking, everyone is being trained to perform the exact same thing.
To work in
And
a factory.
to work in a factory,
Yeah,
yeah. Right. Our educational models are somewhat of a remnant of the Industrial Revolution, actually, which
very
is
much so.
right.
Yeah.
And so, just as a general framing there, the appreciation of what kind of educational models were at the backbone of our upbringing, I think, can really be the necessary juxtaposition to appreciate what it's like to have, say, our unique genius or our unique dharma kind of consciously attended to. And this very much does include like styles of learning, styles of intelligence, multiple styles of intelligence.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So maybe I'll pause here. I can
Yeah.
feel it. Yeah.
is what you're is what you're saying like pointing to the necessity of a sort of different approach for people from the West when we're talking about something like Entelechy because of the educational system, and that's kind of the petri dish that we've all grown out of? Is that sort of what you're saying? That it's a different orientation required?
Yeah, exactly. So there's an educational and learning model orientation, and that's a pretty big pillar. But then, as far as like really tapping into the individual pursuit of self discovery, that's more of like this sort of one on one intimacy facet. And that has more to do with like the archetypal nature of our caregiving environment with our parents and our brothers and sisters, or our kind of family
Mm-hmm.
petri dish. And then it also has to do with the archetypal energy of friends as we're kind of growing up, and who do we sort of pursue intimacy with. And the basic tenet there around self discovery is that there are ways that we can unfold our inner experience that can be qualitatively distinct. And the simple example there is like we've all been around people where they just stifle us. We say one thing and they're like, oh, that's a stupid idea. And we're like,
Yeah.
like there's no conversation happening all of a sudden, versus being with people. And there's something about the way that they see you, the way that they nurture your attention, where you just are given space to unfold. And that quality of self-discovery is hopefully something we receive in our childhood with our parents. And that's a whole nother conversation around child development and where we get it right and where things go wrong. But more so this art of self-discovery, like how do we unfold a human's inner experience so as to be able to start to pursue their entelechy.
Totally. And that's a in some ways I've been thinking a lot about this, especially with the educational system. I'm writing an essay on this right now, and kind of the image for me is the village walls, and this idea that the village walls have grown so high and it's been so long since we saw this untamed forest on the other side of the village walls that we forgot what actually lives over there. And so using that sort of as this metaphor for unfurling who we are, this path of self-discovery like you're talking about, and we've all been a part of this educational system. And the reality is most people didn't have friend groups growing up in middle school and high school who were very much supporting the unfurling of who they are and curiosity and interests. And I know I really didn't have that experience. I'm sure some people did, but I think for the most part most people didn't. And so it's been so long for so many of us. This has been our kind of the reality that we have adapted to. The village walls have grown so high. And so I just, as I'm writing this essay and even what we're speaking about, I can imagine that there's people listening who what we're speaking to is a cool idea. And maybe there is like, yeah, that the place that you're speaking to, this unfurling, this territory on the other side of the village walls, it sounds cool, but it's been so long, or it's almost like this forgotten memory. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it brings to mind a couple of different frames, but one that I think is really quite elegant here is of pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic. And I
Mm.
think in the pre-tragic, there's this idea that like as we're in our childlike naivetes, hopefully if we have a good enough caregiving environment, we have this sort of like blissful sense of a world without tragedy. There's like a magical world, inside of those village walls, you have this feeling of like all is right here. Santa Claus is coming. There's all these ways in which we're not exposed to what the tragedies of this world are. And then in this simple model, it's like the tragedy is like realizing that outside the village walls, there's been like a war, or like there's been this whole history of like all these bloodsheds or all these things that have happened. And maybe the village actually isn't necessarily even safe. Maybe it's in flux, or maybe there's political turmoil. It's like you become aware of the tragedy of what's going on. And
Yeah.
we should maybe riff on the pre-tragedy and tragedy for a moment. There's another stage of this, which is the post-tragedy, which is kind of going through an initiatory threshold and
Yeah.
living in a greater context.
That's super interesting, that the pre-tragedy and then the tragedy, because it seems like most people in our culture are like somewhere stuck between the pre-tragedy and the tragedy. It, like from my understanding, everyone goes through the pre-tragedy stage. That's how we are born into Earth as babies. For some people, the pre-tragedy stage might be 2 weeks. For other people, it might be 5 years. but in some way we all seem to go through that or start there.
Mm-hmm.
But the tragedy stage of waking up to the fucked upness of our world, or that
Mm-hmm.
not everything's so magical and there's real problems in the world and whatnot. Like, it seems like there's a lot of people in this sort of amnesia of not fully feeling into that. So I don't know how you would frame that. Maybe is it people who had a glimpse into the tragedy stage and then were like, oh shit, I don't want to, that's too much, and
Yeah.
so they kind of like take a step back, and then they're somewhere stuck in between the pre-tragedy and the tragedy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, how do you see that?
I think the key word there is developmental collapse. In an ideal environment, and this kind of goes back to the original framing around like self-discovery, accessing insight, building a game plan around our insights, and then journeying into the Entelechy. What that essentially points to is extremely good fortune, like the good fortune of circumstances where maybe our true nature is being appreciated. Out of our true nature being appreciated, someone is consciously helping us curate the conditions out of which we can unfold that true nature, unfold the craft. And then out of that, we're pursuing our ideal. That's a pretty idealistic, and it's reflective of great good fortune, auspicious circumstances. And I want to emphasize there that I think that should be the normal. I think that should be normal for everyone, that more or less like there's a general sense of great love, great compassion, and
Mhm.
great interest in unfolding each
Yeah,
person's unique genius. And that's kind of what I'm taking a stand for. But the contrast there is like within, say, this pre-tragedy into the tragedy, what we see so often, and I've certainly experienced this a ton in my own life, and it's part of what got me on the healing journey. I imagine it's true for you and many other people listening, is it's like it's that like word. It's like that moment where you see the tragedy, kind of just as you were just pointing to, and it's completely overwhelming.
yeah,
It creates collapse. And then
yeah,
we're off to the races, numbing, disassociating, binging TV, etc.
yeah. Yeah, what comes up for me as you speak to this is, um, as we were talking about the tragedy up to this point, I was more of thinking about it like, okay, you wake up and realize the roots of our educational system, you realize the wealth inequality, all these sorts of external things. But I think it's a really common experience where we witness the tragedy within ourselves.
Mm,
The first time the curtain gets pulled back, we're like, fuck, there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
totally.
And then again, like the developmental collapse of too much. No, thank you. I'm not going
Mhm.
there.
Yeah. I really like Gabor Mate's definition of trauma of too much, too fast. And I think that that's a huge piece of the movement from pre-tragedy to tragedy. Just using an example that feels quite relevant, in our current November moment. It's like as a kid, it's like Thanksgiving. Wow, like what a big feast, a big turkey. It's everyone's getting together. And then at a certain age, it's like, wow, there's a lot of this juice stuff going in these special glasses. Like, like what's drinking? It's just like completely naive, just to this like, maybe there's this problem in the petri dish. They seem to have a lot of that stuff, and things get a little bit wobbly. And then next level, next year, it's like there was a genocide. And you're like, what the hell is that? Like genocide, and this is like you go from, at least I'm speaking from my own life, this pleasant sense of wow, everyone's together, we're warm, thank God, or something like this, like gratitude. This is about gratitude, and then layer by layer, it's like, oh my God, there's like alcoholism rampant, and there's tensions in the social field, and the whole basis of this holiday is terrible. Like, what's the real story? And it's just like there's a lot that happens really fast that to contextualize as a child is just way too much. So
Yeah,
we kind of
yeah,
piece these things together as we go.
totally. Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking about how, everything we're talking about, the proper nurturing as a child and attunement to our nature and sort of the root of education, right? Educari, to draw out kind of this essential nature of who we are.
Mm.
I feel like the way that you and I think about sort of this path of healing and self-discovery, everything that we're talking about, is a bit of a different flavor than a lot of people in this sort of new age self-development world, in that so much of our emphasis is on the unobstructed expression. of who we are. So much of
Hmm.
our emphasis is on this idea of expression, of unfurling, of unlocking this creative genius, where I feel like a lot of people, it's more about just like this idea of healing. Okay, we're just healing these old things. But then what do we do once we're healed? And that's where kind of the expression comes in. It's not that it has to start then, but um yeah, and I just feel like that it's a really important piece that not that I'm looking forward to more people getting on board with. And I
Hmm.
think it kind of gives rise to your second point around putting your insights and lifestyle changes into action,
Hmm.
because it's like where
Hmm.
what practices are we putting into action, what insights are we putting into action. That's like the kind of um those are like the seeds of this essential nature, right? So
Hmm.
I would love to hear you riff on that a bit.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind now, there's so many different ways to address this. There's so many different ways to pull on the different threads that you're laying down. But what comes to mind right now is the sense of positive influence. And what I think is often the case here within our Western zeitgeist is that as we grow up, we're inundated with a level of abundance that's actually kind of stupefying. And this is perhaps most beautifully signified by just like the plethora of AI slop that's coming through. Now you can text generate incredible videos. The sense of I turn on Netflix and there's a gazillion different shows to watch. There's a way in which we're saturated now with ultra abundance, with Wikipedia or these different modes of learning. It's quite literally like we have an incredible plethora of information that's available to us, but nonetheless, it somehow loses its significance. It somehow loses
Mm,
its ability to actually inspire us and actually nourish us.
mm,
And so I guess the thread around positive influence that I think is really important is that for many people, especially those people who are going to find and listen to this particular podcast, it's like there probably are a lot of moments of amazing grace, of the sense of, for whatever reason, there's an auspicious moment of awakening or revelation. Maybe it's the moment of journaling. Maybe it's the moment where you're on mushrooms in the woods with your friends. There's some kind of like, wow, I'm actually really, really fortunate. Despite all the tragedy, despite all the hardship, despite all the blah, I can actually create something incredible with my life if I put in the work and put in the time.
mm-hmm.
And I think these are moments of positive influence where it's almost like lightning strikes. Like you see the brilliant flash.
Yeah.
And I think one of the hardest things about our time is actually creating a collage of brilliant flashes so that
Mm,
these energies don't wane, because they will dissipate. An insight fades
yeah.
pretty quickly if we
Like an
don't.
incubator for the lightning flash.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
A way of nurturing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Totally, man. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. What's really coming up for me around this, and something that I've been thinking a lot about that I would love to hear you talk about, something I've been wanting to talk about, but just it hasn't made its way out, is everything we're talking about, creativity, because I think there's something important about the why again, coming back to this idea of what's the why. So when you have the lightning flash and you're putting it into the incubator,
Hmm.
what's the why? And another way to think about that is like, where is it going? Where
Hmm.
is this leading to? If you don't see that there's some like truly beautiful possibility and potential of what's going to happen as you start to practice,
Hmm.
what's going to happen as you start to put these insights into more of a daily momentum building container, like where is it leading? And I feel like for a lot of people, and definitely myself in the past and at some points, there's like these very deep sort of layers of disbelief.
Hmm.
And it's like it's not worth it. It's not going to go anywhere. Or
Yeah.
it's like I'm not one of those people who could create something truly magical, or whatever it is. And then so it's
Hmm.
like, what's the point of putting it into practice?
Hmm.
But I guess to just take a little bit of a step back here,
Yeah.
because again, everything that we're talking about is like this developmental arc of us that is leading to greater levels of unfurlment. And I think an important kind of nuance to what you're bringing is that there's a very human part to that unfurling process. It's not like we just sit back and let our lives unfurl, but there's these moments of insight, of flash, of where you kind of see where the unfurling is wanting to go, and then it's our job, kind of as the human, this this uh, this animal body, of putting of ingraining that sort of lightning flash into a habit, even though habit's such a boring word, but like really like into these daily rhythms of who we are. And then over time it's generating into something beautiful.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to zoom out on is like I've had this thought of, or I've talked a lot about creativity, because that's ultimately what we're talking about, creating. And partly because I was never a creative kid growing up. Like I played soccer, I played video games, and I hung out with my friends. And my friends were the kind of people who would make fun of the people in the art room, like not create, not artistic people or anything. And as of the past years, there's just been this sort of algae bloom of creativity and art and things like this. And now it's just like, oh my gosh, we are all this, and it is a essential part of our nature,
Mm.
like on par with needing to drink water and eat food. It's like humans are creators. This is who we are. This is an essential part of what we do and what nourishes us.
Yeah.
But I have this sense that as soon as some people hear the word creativity, or they're scrolling Instagram and then they hear someone else start talking about creativity, they're like, next, I just want to learn how to scale my business. I want to learn how to make more money. And it's like we compartmentalize like art, creativity, and then life.
Yeah.
And so the through line I'm trying to make here is this reintegration of sort of
Mm-hmm.
this unfurling process, our creativity, our creative nature, almost like it's the mouth of the river that everything else flows from. And that includes your business. That includes all of it. Um, and so I'm curious what comes up for you with this. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
just talk.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're definitely bringing more life into this word of Entelechy, because I think the spirit of the Entelechy is woven in everything that you're sharing around feeling the creative spirit, how the creative spirit wants to move through us, and then seeing what can become through following the creative spirit. And one of the things that comes to my mind are these different kinds of inspiration. And it's actually interesting to consider that some forms of inspiration are actually kind of dangerous. For example, like a kind of inspiration that's actually played a pretty significant role in my life over the years as I've tried to kind of get my different, artistic endeavors going and then failing, sort of the picking oneself up again and again and again, fall 1,000 times, get up 1,001 kind of thing, is this idea of inspiration where like you get the lightning strike and you're like, holy shit, I see the potential of what's possible. And you go all in and you just, and that almost has like this zealous mania quality to it. And from a, say, a wiser perspective, and certainly someone like where I sit now of being, just hundreds of hours into like the basic human condition of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that kind of instantaneous zealousness of inspiration is dangerous because it almost always fails. But there's like this sort of youthful naivete of like, if I give it my all this one time, I'm going to be so powerfully in the transform. Like it's kind of beautiful in a way, but
Yeah.
the danger is in the unrealism of it. And I think one of the things that is so interesting that I think is a part of our toggling process, and it's a part of the ethos I see bringing through in the Forge, and it's a part of what I feel like is ingrained in this deeper, say, rooting into our developmental scaffolding and our learning style and our self-discovery process, et cetera, is how to feel those moments of the lightning, of noticing our entelechy, but then grounding it into a lifestyle, a habit pattern, a way of pursuing our artistic craft that does do the I'm an entrepreneur thing, which is connected to paying the bills and putting bread on the table kind of thing. And also, I am pursuing my artistic craft in a way that is professional, kind of that Stephen Pressfield idea of there's amateur ways of pursuing, and then there's professional ways of pursuing the craft. And I think part of how I hear this, and I'll pause here and I want to get your take on, is that the entrepreneurial part and the professional part is a part of making it truly of value and of benefit to other people and to this world. And it moves something from, say, like a more fickle inspiration into like a deeply life sustaining inspiration.
Yeah, yeah, totally. What comes up for me with that is just this idea of the divide that I feel like our culture has made between professional work and then like creativity, art.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of what you and I are both working or just naturally kind of breaking the divide between, showing that it actually is one and the same. And when they're able to be married together, it takes it to a whole nother level. Like I was riffing on this recently. My favorite entrepreneurs are the ones who are so clearly in their taste, like their artistic taste is so clearly infused in their business. Like Godzi, for example, brings this whole other flavor. It brings this sort of kind of mythopoetic root system to what it is, and it takes on this whole new life. And so I love that.
Mm.
And I want to go back though to what you said, like these sort of lightning bolt moments, the zealous spirit that doesn't really lead to the kind of change that we're actually craving. And
Mm-hmm.
that, man, I can just, I, myself, and I can think about so many people listening and so many people I know who just resonate with that experience. And maybe it's a part of the natural human developmental arc where we all have to go through that. But I'm so curious to hear you kind of riff on that a bit more and maybe talk about how we can start to relate to those sort of lightning bolt experiences in a way that is leading to the more sustainable, deep change that we're looking for.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, I think this is a really fun place that we get to play with the image of the tragic into the post-tragic. We get to play with, the generation that's at play in this village, and what's going on in the village of humanity. I don't know if I'm using your image correctly, but I'm just going to run with it
I'm
here.
in the village with you right now, man. We're like looking from the tip of the forest with some binoculars into the into the village. We're studying it, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we're studying it. We're studying our culture, and I think when it comes to, say, developmental collapse, which is this way in which we come into a certain age and we see the level of tragedy, we see the
mm,
level of problems. We
yeah,
have, say, parents that are putting pressure on us, and it's time to get a job, and we look out into the job world and we think,
yeah,
okay, what am I going to do? And that
yeah,
can be a pretty terrifying abyss. I know it was a pretty terrifying abyss for me. The pursuit of the lightning here is really interesting because in a way it ties to our childlike joy or our childlike curiosity, that there's something inside of us. I'll certainly say it for myself, something inside of me as that pressure cooker of, you're going to need to figure out how to find your way in this world. There was some deeply ingrained sense inside of me that's like, there is a way of doing this that is going to be extremely badass. And there was the drawing in of different people who had these inspirational threads here, and that was maybe my own version of an Entelechy. But then, given that there was so much developmental collapse in my life, there were so many underdeveloped areas, there were so many areas where there was neglect or just an overall basic desert of just, I have no idea how to actually do these habits in a way that would be entrepreneurially fruitful or artistically fruitful. Then as far as like the medicine path goes, there's almost like that comes online as like, I know I have these moments of lightning, and I need this lightning as much as possible to keep illuminating that amazing thing so that I can try
yeah.
to get, through this tragedy. And I think you kind of start to pick up what I'm laying down is
Totally,
we
man.
in a way we have a toggle between like the lightning seekers who are trying to muster that energy of seeing the brilliance of what's possible given the tragic circumstances, and then we have like the lightning harnessers who have figured out how to live a lifestyle of harnessing their lightning day in and day out, whether or not they're even getting the lightning, because maybe on some level that light is now inside of them, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Yeah, it feels like the natural progression, not necessarily that it's a given that everyone will become lightning wielders, but like and it's the lightning wielders that are helping the lightning seekers. But man, this is so potent for me because I feel like I'm just so in my transition right now into being more of a lightning wielder. I mean, I'm already someone with a deep intensity and ambitious nature, and I was the ultimate lightning seeker. And I can't tell you how many times after medicine journeys or just different moments where it's so obvious. I finally found the answer. I know exactly what I need to do. I know the exact habits, and I know that I can do it. I know that I can do it. And this time it's going to be it. But then it didn't happen. And the amount of shame and letdown. And so it's been a very bumpy path to the
Mm-hmm.
necessity of becoming a lightning wielder.
Mm.
Yeah, there's so much there. What's coming to me is the idea of learned helplessness, and just that it feels very in parallel to developmental collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And and I really relate to this, like these different areas of who we are, and that there's some areas that are just super developed and very mature, and then there's these other areas of our development that are, so young still, and so kind of prone to this sort of developmental collapse. And then life finally will present you with a circumstance to smooth out that edge, and you're just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yo, this is so much. And I think one of those big areas for a lot of people is money.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of, I've heard Jazzy riff on the kind of deep um, relationship between money and learned helplessness.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Robert Anton Wilson riffs on this in Prometheus Rising, that sort of our sense of survival was once completely intertwined with our sense of tribal belonging. If we belonged to a tribe, that was like, check, I'm surviving. I'm surviving to another day. That was sort of the bio survival ticket that he kind of calls it. And nowadays, the bio survival ticket has completely transitioned into money. Like that is, and just this, it's really interesting to me, this sort of connection between money and like the deepest sense of our animalistic survival, and
Yeah.
like how primal that drive is.
Yeah.
And so, it makes so much sense to me that there's people that so many people just want to go up the corporate ladder. And they're like, as soon as we can, that security and stability come before any sense of knowing what I want to do, or what I want to do. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that makes our conversation really interesting, and I know this about you and I know this about myself, people who listening might not know this about us yet per se, but we are both two people who have deeply believed in our dreams and are actively pursuing them as a lifestyle. And I think that toggle with money is significant because, in a way, there are people who make the sacrifice of, I can't go for my dream, I need to provide. And sometimes that's wise. Sometimes that's reflective of discriminating wisdom. For whatever reason, the circumstances of my life, I have a family, I have kids, blah, blah, blah. I need to sacrifice, say, my artistic pursuit or the thing that I know is possible of being a public speaker on motivation or God knows what, because I need to put bread on the table. And so,
Yeah,
bless these
yeah.
people. There's a lot
For
of
sure,
people.
man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think where we have a lot of medicine to share, and I think there's even some facets of what you were just touching on with your own journey, which I would love to double click on here, which is when people actually keep their vision in mind, their entelechy in mind, and then unabashedly and unapologetically go through all of the motions year after year, all those stumbling blocks to pursue it like fully, and then actually get to that relatively rarefied air of having a career around it. There's, I think, a pretty special energy that comes along with that, because in a way we go from a I believe that my dream is possible person to a I am now an embodiment of your dream is possible, because if I can do it, you definitely can do it. There's nothing special about me thing. And I think that that's a really powerful aspect of where we both sit, and that we're both really all in on the pursuit of the dream. And just as a try to way to toss it back to you here, like, in the last 6 months, I've seen this really come through for you super strongly with your sort of like sink or swim Costa Rica adventure. But also in the last few years, it's really been pretty impressive to see like how you've, in your own words, gone from I have a lot of lightning to I have it all figured out to going through your stumbling blocks and keep showing up to really pursue your dream. So, I mean, obviously do with this what you want and speak to what you want, but I do think there's a lot of richness, and I certainly feel interested in just hearing more about kind of how that has been for you and kind of going from figuring out to having it unfigured out.
Yeah, yeah. Man, there's so much here. I'm just gonna start and see where it wants to go, but um, just double clicking on what you said, I came from a relatively good upbringing and had a lot of needs taken care of, and so I think that has a big role on like this idea of, am I chasing my dreams or do I just need to get money? Like definitely think there's a deep interplay of kind of where we started and then the leaps that we're willing to take. And at the same time, I think it's like this like relative thing where the leap that I am taking is, to me, it's as intense as the leap that someone else is taking relative to where they're at. And so, um, yeah, just to say that, and for me, the way that I relate to life is like I just can't settle. That's just my nature. Like I'm not here to settle. This opportunity we have is so precious and so pure, and I'm here to take it all the way, and like the fullest expression of whoever I am, whatever my nature is, like I want to grow this ecosystem into its most beautiful, fulfilling, robust food forest that it can possibly be. Not from this place of being a martyr, kind of what we talked about last time, this from this deep desire of this sort of collective happiness, and because it is the most interesting, fun adventure to be on, and in moments challenging and in all of this, but it's alive. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's challenging or beautiful and joyous, it's alive. It's so alive. And it's so that's where I kind of come from.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I kind of come from. Um, and so to sort of speak to your early question, and for me, I took a very maybe non-traditional way of getting to where I am, and the past few years, I would go travel and then I'd come home, and not everyone has the luxury to come home, but for me, I could have found a job and then not had to come home or something. And for me, it's just I'm so someone who can't sacrifice not doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
Like like and we've talked about this idea of sort of creating this lifestyle around your dream or around kind of the unfurling nature of who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and the virtuous cycles that creates,
Yeah.
which I think would be fun to get into.
Yeah.
And so for me, I kind of think about that sort of lifestyle, which just to unpack that for anyone who doesn't quite understand what I mean, is like where how you make money and what you do is a direct expression of sort of your innate gifts, what you're naturally curious and interested in. And so then it's this beautiful kind of loop of incentive structures where your work is actually reinforcing, the things that you're already deeply passionate and care about. And then so it's just this like infinite spiral of kind of your unfurling process in a way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think about that a bit like the spokes of a wheel. And so, and maybe that's another visual for these sort of different developmental arenas of ourself. And so we're kind of tending to these different spokes of the wheel. And as we are tending to the different spokes of the wheel, it starts to turn on its own. And eventually it kind of turns into this self generating turning wheel. But it's like we have to sort of go to these different places. And one of the spokes of the wheel might be like our financial development and our financial maturity and entrepreneurship and all of this. Another one spoke of the wheel might be our sort of creative nature and developing our taste and our crafts and learning to write things like this. Um, and so for me, it's really been this journey of tending to the different spokes of the wheel. And I feel like I'm just now getting to the point where the wheel is actually starting to turn.
Yeah.
And this shift from being a lightning chaser to a lightning wielder, I think, has been a major part of the wheel that has been missing.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just kind of Steven Pressfield vibe. It just feels like another level of going pro. It feels like a deeper maturity walked into the room with this really naive, excited child about the lightning and was like, okay, that's really cool. You have a place at the table. It's so beautiful, that desire. It's so beautiful, the potential that you see of what could be possible. And
Yeah.
like, I'm going to sit down with you at the table and kind of map out a way to actually do this, a sustainable way. And it's sort of over time integrating the patterns that we've seen of, okay, the
Mm.
lightning strikes haven't exactly translated into the change I've been looking for. And so
Yeah.
what's the missing piece here? And it
Mm.
kind of feels like this deeper maturity and sort of a settling into the infinite game, really.
Yeah.
The last thing that I would add to what I was saying is another quote from one of your things, which I'll just read the whole thing. Once you have started, go all the way. Complete the path. To flourish, we strengthen confidence as a daily practice. Quote, there is a there, worth fully going for.
Mm.
And so I feel like part of this sort of lightning seeker to lightning wielder
Mm.
journey is is strengthening the belief that there is a there. And it's like the distance between, and over time we are getting better at holding that belief that there is a there. So we don't need the lightning strike as much. And so we get the lightning strike. Okay, there's a there. Maybe we design an experiment where we turn this into like a daily practice or a habit or kind of this ingrained behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start, but then it kind of fades, and then we maybe stop, and then we get another lightning strike, and then we start again. And then maybe while we're doing that, we experience a sort of breakthrough moment, whether it's through your writing or something like this, where you're just like, oh my gosh, it's so good. I'm touching that same lightning again through the integration of the practice. So then over time, it's just kind of this like continual development of
Mm.
that. And then I feel like there's a point in time where there's no more really losing the lightning. It's just embedded, and we've reached the virtuous cycle to the behavior that we have ingrained is like direct access and expression of the lightning itself. And it's
Yeah.
just like this constant feedback loop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, incredible. Yeah, an image that's stuck in my mind actually is from the artist Parangi, whom I got some interesting views into his career because he was living in Sedona at the same time I was living in Sedona, and he was in this incredible upward movement at that time in his life and transitioning from kind of being a little bit more stable in Sedona to what ultimately became like his constant touring, flourishing musical life. And I remember like hanging out in front of like a show one night, and just he had just gotten back from a big adventure, and he was riffing on how he was in the stage for maybe a year or two or three where he felt like he was just pumping up the hot air balloon, and then eventually the hot air balloon got enough, um, hot air, and that it actually took off. And I think that there's two parts to this in our conversation, and one is very much the do you believe aspect of, how much do you want to take seriously your lightning. And I think a huge part of my professional career, honestly, is being with people and being the person in their corner that's like, I am going to take seriously your lightning, and I'm going to, unfold a methodology of the self-discovery and looking at these insights and discovering the training regimen such that we can take this lightning very seriously, and you can learn how to harness it, or unfold an even more brilliant way of harnessing it, kind of thing. And so, that's a deep pathway that I have a lot of devotion to, and I know you have a lot of devotion to. I think that aspect of taking seriously the belief or taking seriously the lightning, that's like one whole domain. But this like pumping up the hot air balloon, I think is another huge conversation here, because such a key piece for our generation and the people who are wanting to, make this transition from a lightning seeker to lightning wielder. I love that we somehow landed on this
I
poetic
love it. I
description.
love it too, man.
Yeah, it's really good. It is this question of what does it really take? Like what does it really take to fill up that hot air balloon? And I think Parangi is a potent example because, a lot of people probably see him at his current stage, and just like a lot of extremely talented performers, you see them do the metaphorical triple backflip and they make it look easy. And you're like, wow, maybe they're just a prodigy. Maybe he's always been like
Right.
that. You don't
yeah,
see the many years of like the grind, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure, man. There's a couple things. One, both actually have kind of been something that Godsy's been riffing a lot on that I've been thinking a lot about as well. And one is just reading biographies and looking at all of these people who, so many of these people, like a lot of these greats and masters, it's the same thing, pumping the air balloon for years and years. And then we see this massive, the sort of tipping point, and then they're an overnight success kind of thing. And so one of the ideas is like, how, how many times do we need to hear that? How many biographies of these people do we need to hear about until it finally clicks for us that that's the way? Sure, there's outliers, but like, that's the way. And as soon as we can acknowledge that, and it's like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna be one of them, and I'm gonna follow. Like I'm gonna do the thing.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of really generative quality, I think, about being in the pumping of the balloon phase. Like for example, I go through my Substack sometimes, and I go scroll all the way down, and it's a long scroll now because I've been writing for a while. And I see 0 likes, 0 likes, 0 likes, 1 like, 1 like, 0 likes, 0 likes, 0 likes. And as I am looking at these essays internally, I have the feeling that like I'm gonna show people this in 5 years and be like, look at this. I did the work. I pumped it. And so there's like this sort of very generative frame for me around that of like
Yeah.
seeing yourself just like those people, like the Steve Jobs, like all these people, as you're looking through and you see the 0 likes,
Yeah.
like I'm one of them, you
Yeah.
know? And then the other, and I guess this is along that sort of same idea. This was something that Gazi was riffing on, is if we're able to kind of hold that frame that this is going to be seeing yourself telling the story when you're on that big podcast stage or you're speaking to the audience, showing them the picture of all the 0 likes. If you can sort of cultivate that frame, like this is the story that I'm going to tell, screenshotting your bank account when it has $75 in it. This is the story I'm going to tell when I make it. It creates this sort of like dopamine experience and just like this generative quality. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's just like, speaking to everyone
Yeah.
who's maybe stuck on this,
Yeah.
swallow the pill and come join us, you know
Go.
in the trying phase, in the pumping of the air balloon, because it's like, in a way, I imagine these are some of the golden years.
Yeah.
These are the golden years that we'll probably look back on. And so like, let's go have a good time, enjoy it, find friends that are also in that same sort of pumping of the air balloon phase. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, 100%, man. The energy coming through is brilliant. And I feel like it is inspiring me to want to go straight mystical for a moment. There's this quote from Terence
Oh,
McKenna, and he says, "The universe isn't made out of molecules, it's made out of stories." And I feel like that energy of really seeing that in the moment where you're taking the screenshot of the $75 bank account and then you're connecting to the story, that is in a way just a deep harnessing of the lightning. It's the harnessing of the same energy that every single human that's successful is harnessing, which is essentially the story. What are we telling ourselves about what's happening in our experience? And then how are we communicating to others what's happening in our experience that's either leveraging the creative juju, like elevating the mojo of life, where it's like, I hear that story from Blake and I'm like, fuck yeah, Blake, like that's amazing. And if you went the other way and you saw the $75 in your bank account and you collapse and it's like you became a pity party, it's like maybe we'd have love and compassion for you there and we'd want to get you support and therapy and et cetera, et cetera.
yeah,
But that's a much more difficult story to deal with, and I think that's the toggle that a lot of our people are in, honestly, where it's like they're in that moment and then they're stuck in the quagmire of turning towards drugs or turning towards addiction or turning towards the developmental collapse. And I think
yeah,
one of the big medicines that we're trying to really conjure here is to turn towards the other way and say, like, no, choose the fucking dope story, take the screenshot and roll up your sleeves and go for it. The universe is made out of stories and your story is important. It matters. Your choice here matters.
totally. And we have the capacity to wield the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not at the mercy of the story. We have the capacity to wield the story. And oftentimes, like the $75 in my bank account, it's not only the beautiful, this is the story I'm going to tell when I'm on the podcast, there often is also this element of the, the developmental collapse or something like this. They usually are working in tandem, like,
Yeah.
like a kind of, what do you call it? Not jigsaw, like a
Seesaw?
seesaw, like a seesaw. Yeah, they're often coming together. That usually is kind of the nature of the sort of lightning strike as well. It's like, oh my God, and then, whoa, this is possible. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that makes or breaks the difference, right? For all
yeah,
of us who are constantly trying to be on the harnessing of the lightning, every person, mostly, I think I could say definitively like 100% absolute, but just for a touch of humility in this, so let's say like most people, 98% or something, are going to have that toggle every single day in one way,
yeah,
shape, form, or another. I mean, I do think, to your point earlier, that as we get more and more proficient with our virtuous cycles, we
totally.
feel less and less and less of, say, the
Yeah.
critical voice, or we feel less and less. It becomes more
Mhm.
automatic. It becomes more
Stabilizing.
exactly. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is true. I think that that's important
yeah,
to emphasize
for
because
sure.
hard things do get easier, and that's a
Yeah, yeah,
blessing.
totally. And I think this is what I was thinking about, and I forgot. Like, this is for me. This is also why being in sort of communities, or
Mm,
even like the gift of social media and whatnot, is so incredibly valuable. I can't tell you how many times I've kind of been on that seesaw of the story, and I listen to something, I listen to a podcast, or maybe I'm taking a course or something, and the people speaking or whatever, it's just these constant reminders of the things that we all know that we just need to hear again. Like, everyone listening has probably heard that the path of mastery is just a ton of mistakes and iterations, and it's not an overnight success. But how many of us are fully stabilized in that sort of view and orientation? It's like, not much. We need these reminders, and I think it's sort of being in these spaces where that's the resonance being played, and we're all coming together to sort of tend to that coherence, because
mm,
there's going to be moments where you're falling off the seesaw, I'm falling off the seesaw, and we're like helping each other back up, and reminding each other of this. And so, yeah, I just think it speaks to sort of the power of our times with social media, friendships, communities, things like this. It's so valuable.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it really brings to mind something I've been thinking a lot about, especially since we started this adventure together. But it's kind of crystallized as just like an important developmental theme in my life, which is the cultivation of team, what we would say in spiritual community, like the cultivation of a sangha or a satsang. But essentially, like this cultivation of like who are the people in my inner circle that I have an interdependence with. And the thought process here is interesting because, in a way, within our, say, capitalistic framework, there's a sort of sense that like we don't necessarily need each other. Like there's a whole caregiver experience from like, let's call it 0 to 18, where like we 100% depend on people, we need them, and then at a certain point we're supposed to just sort of launch into this like individualistic world where you don't quote unquote need people. Even though that's not exactly true, it's somehow like the story that a lot of people buy, and it's certainly one that a lot of people individualistically fall into, especially in sort of the epidemic of aloneness. But the piece that I think is so interesting is going from the sense of like, quote unquote, we need each other in terms of like a needy clinginess, which in its own way is
Mhm.
like unattractive or demagnetizing, into this appreciation of, well, what really brings out like full flourishing. And I think this is one of the through lines I wanted to make into our last episode and kind of riff on with you is, this obsession with human flourishing. If we're really looking at what makes us fully come alive, what I know for myself is that so much of what motivates my engagement with this world is interplays and exchanges I'm having with people that I love. And this movement
Yeah.
into like a development, whether we call it a team or a satsang or just a way of interacting where our own personal mission is entangled with other people's mission, where like the tide is rising together, I think is a really powerful motif because it's actually moving into a deeper unlock. I'm speaking from my own experience, but I think it's probably really true for a lot of people. There's even more motivation for flourishing, being entangled in networks of like high trust, high confidence teams, high confidence, high trust relationships. And I think emphasizing that or making that coding explicit is a huge unlock of life force energy.
Totally, man. I think perfectly said. That as you like, one of the greatest technologies that I have gotten to tap into in terms of this path of development we're talking about has been friendships, specifically you and a couple others that come to mind, that just the conversations are so incredibly rich, and sending voice messages, and yeah, I don't even think I can articulate how much it's helped and just done magic for me in my own life. So couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, incredible. Are we feeling like we want to land the plane here?
I think so.
Yeah. All right, cool. I'm down with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
hit like some kind of crescendo of energy, and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all right, man. I think that's about good for today. I really enjoyed today's episode. For anyone who listened to this point, if you want to hit the subscribe button, leave us a like, leave us a comment. How'd it go? What thoughts came up for you? What do you disagree with? What did you love? All the things. Really appreciate you being here, though, if you still are here. We value your attention and energy very, very much.
yeah, if you're
And
here at the end of episode 2, you're part of a pretty rarefied air
yeah,
cohort.
just wait. Hey, Mom. Thanks for listening, Mom. uh, but yeah, man, so good to be here with you. Any final words?
Final words. I watched the South Park last night where it was all about influencer culture, and they were having these hilarious whips on like smash that like button, tell me what you think. It's just like, oh man,
Let's go.
like South Park is like prophecy these days.
Dude, South Park's the best. All right, man. Until
Let's
next
go.
time.